You know, the history of recovery is full of hidden archives, stories that are just waiting to be told. Today, we're opening up one of the most surprising chapters of all, a secret correspondence between two absolute giants of the 20th century. One was a desperate man who co-founded Alcoholics Anonymous. The other, a legendary psychoanalyst. And their worlds collided over one single, hugely controversial question. Could a chemical actually unlock the human soul? So that brings us to the big question of this entire explainer. Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a global movement built on spiritual principles and, of course, total sobriety. So what if I told you that its history is completely entangled with LSD? I know, it sounds impossible, right? But the proof is right there, hiding in plain sight, preserved in a series of letters. So picture this. On one side, you've got Bill Wilson, the co-founder of AA. This is a man who was desperately searching for a practical, real-world solution to the living hell of alcoholism. And on the other side, you have Carl Jung, the legendary psychoanalyst, a man who believed in the deep, slow, methodical work of exploring your own unconscious. One guy was looking for a key to open a door quickly, the other was wanting that there are absolutely no shortcuts. Their whole philosophies seem worlds apart, which is what makes this connection so fascinating. Okay, so to really get this story, you have to get inside Bill Wilson's head. We have to understand his desperate search. He wasn't just looking to get sober, he was looking for a flat-out miracle. And here's the wild part. Carl Jung is actually there, right at the beginning of this whole thing, and he doesn't even know it. See, his advice to just one patient, a guy named Roland Hazard, set off this incredible chain reaction. Hazard's story of getting sober through a spiritual group eventually got to a still drinking, still struggling Bill Wilson, and that led Wilson to a hospital in 1934 where he had his own famous spiritual awakening, the very experience that would become the cornerstone of Alcoholics Anonymous just 1 year later. But here's the kicker, a crucial detail that often gets, let's say, edited out of the official story. Wilson's life-changing spiritual vision wasn't just some moment of pure divine grace. Turns out, he was being treated with a so-called cure that included belladonna, which is a known hallucinogen. So think about that. The very foundation of AA's spiritual program was, ironically, picked off by a chemical. And you can just feel the power of what happened in his own words. He says he was on a mountain, that a wind, not of air but of spirit, was blowing. And then, boom, it burst upon him that he was a free man. This wasn't just a nice feeling. It was a profound, world-shattering vision that completely broke his obsession with alcohol, permanently. But this created a huge problem for Wilson. He'd had his miracle, but he quickly realized you can't just bottle it up and give it to someone else. You can't schedule a spontaneous spiritual awakening for Tuesday at 3 p.m. For so many alcoholics, especially the really cynical ones, that experience just felt completely out of reach. And that frustration launched Wilson on a lifelong quest for a key, something that could reliably unlock that spiritual door for other people. And that search for a spiritual key is what brings us to the other side of our story, to Carl Jung, who was busy arguing that there are no shortcuts to the soul. Now, Wilson knew exactly how important Jung's advice to Roland Hazard had been all those years ago. In a letter he would write later, he called it the first foundation stone of the entire AA fellowship. I mean, that's a massive tribute to a man he'd never even met, but whose work he deeply admired from a distance. But on this whole idea of chemically induced visions, Jung was, to put it mildly, deeply skeptical. He basically argued that it was a dangerous mistake, confusing a drug's effect on your body for a genuine moral and mental achievement. To him, psychedelics offered a dangerously simple ersatz. And that word he uses, ersatz, it's so important for understanding where he's coming from. It means an artificial, inferior substitute. So for Jung, using a drug to get a spiritual vision was like looking at a postcard of the Grand Canyon instead of actually hiking it. Sure, you get the picture, but you miss the entire journey, the struggle, the real discovery. All right, so you see the setup, right? We've got the seeker who's looking for a key, and we've got the sage who's warning against any and all shortcuts. Well, in 1961, their two worlds finally and dramatically collide. The year is 1961. Bill Wilson, now decades sober and a household name in recovery circles, decides it's time to write to the man himself, the now elderly Carl Jung. He starts by thanking him for that foundational role he played in AA's history, but he has something else on his mind, something he's been experimenting with. So what was driving him? It really came down to this one number, 50%. Wilson wrote to Jung about some new Canadian research. It showed that when you treated severe, so-called hopeless alcoholics with LSD, the recovery rate could shoot up to a staggering 50%. For Wilson, that was a number he just couldn't ignore. So Wilson sends this 4-page letter to Jung. But here's where it gets really interesting. For decades, when AA would publish this historic correspondence, they only ever showed you the first 2 pages. The last 2 pages, the ones they called personal medical matters, were kept hidden away. So what was on those pages that was so explosive it had to be censored? This. On those hidden pages, Bill Wilson confesses. He comes right out and tells Jung that he himself has taken LSD under medical supervision, and that it reenacted his original life-saving spiritual experience from 1934 with, in his words, wonderful splendor. And then he puts it all on the line. He directly asks the great Carl Jung for his comment, his professional opinion on using this drug to save the lives of hopeless alcoholics. I mean, think about that for a second. The founder of Alcoholics Anonymous had just asked the world's most famous psychoanalyst to endorse LSD as a spiritual tool. His request, however, was about to collide with a story of absolutely tragic timing. So Wilson sends his letter in March, and he waits. 2 whole months go by before he gets a reply. And it's not from Jung, it's from his assistant. She explains that Jung is very ill, but she promises to show him the letter as soon as he's strong enough. He never got the chance. Just 9 days after that reply was sent, Carl Jung died. And with him, any chance of an answer to Wilson's enormous question was lost to time. And this just leaves us with this huge what if, right? Could the man who hated shortcuts have possibly made an exception for LSD? Well, you can argue it both ways. On the yes side, Jung was flexible. He eventually came around to endorsing AA's group model, even after he was skeptical of groups at first. Plus, he himself admitted he knew far too little about LSD. But the arguments for no are just as strong. His core principles were all about the difficult journey, and a colleague later confirmed he was greatly opposed to its use. We're never going to know what Jung would have said, but the secret correspondence, hidden away for decades, it forces us to look at the entire history of recovery in a totally new light. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other secret histories, what other unlikely alliances and radical ideas are still out there, just sitting in an archive somewhere, waiting to be discovered?